Welcome to In the Reads, the podcast of San Jose State University's Read Magazine, California's oldest literary journal. I'm Peggy Pollard. This episode, I am interviewing journalist Suzanne Rico, the judge and sponsor of Read Magazine's Gabriele Rico Challenge for Nonfiction. Suzanne Rico is a print and television journalist whose newscast in Los Angeles won 3 Emmy Awards. Suzanne's writing has been featured in Oprah Magazine, The Atlantic, Los Angeles Magazine, LA Times, Washington Post, and many others. I'll be talking with Suzanne about the past 3 years of winners from our Read Magazine's nonfiction writing contest, the Gabriele Rico Challenge for Nonfiction. This contest is sponsored by the Rico family in honor of Suzanne's mother. You'll hear more about Gabriele later. This contest recognizes outstanding works of nonfiction, awarding $1,333 to the author of the winning entry. We're looking for creative nonfiction such as personal essays or narratives. You can find more info on readmag.org. Each year's contest winning story is chosen from 3 finalists by our celebrity guest judge, Suzanne Rico. The stories we'll discuss today are the 2023 winner, Growing Up Godless by Robert Isaacs, 2024 winner, Breaking Kayfabe by Amelia Skinner Saint, and this year's 2025 issue, the winning piece is Blank Spaces, Black Frames by Catherine Trueblood. Welcome to In the Reads podcast, Suzanne. It's a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you so much. So happy to be here. San Jose State is very close to my heart. My mom taught there for 40 years.
Can you first tell us about how and why you started the Gabriele Rico Challenge for Nonfiction?
Well, because she was so close to San Jose State, we wanted to do something in her memory. And you notice that the prize amount is a little bit wacky, $1,333. My mom had this thing about odd numbers. So we thought that she would appreciate that amount. So we did that. And we've kept it up. She's been gone now since 2013, and we've kept it up every year because we feel like it really acknowledges her contribution to creative writing. She was a best-selling author. She was a Stanford PhD. She was a well-known speaker on the self-help circuit, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, flying all over the country and speaking at Esalen and Omega. And she really was a force of nature. And we wanted to do something annually that would remember her, and we figured what better place than at the university where she spent almost her entire career.
Wonderful. We're honored to be able to follow in her footsteps, and especially I am as a creative writing student. Growing up with your mother, did you see a lot of her work that she was doing in the writing field?
I didn't, I wish that I'd paid more attention. I think when we're young, we don't really understand the benefit of getting to know our parents and their work. And we see them just as parents, as a mother and not as a human being. Certainly I was aware of her work because she was gone so much. So I was a latchkey kid. Certainly I was aware that her book was taking off because that also took her away from us a lot. But her life really, like the lifeblood that ran through her was creative writing and split brain research and how to unlock trauma and creativity through creative writing, which I think is really interesting as we talk about these 3 essays, which we really see people processing events and their pasts in a way that my mom would be so thrilled about. I wish I could go back and ask her so many questions about what she did. She used a lot of her children in her writing. So we appear throughout her books quite a bit, little anecdotes of us. And so she certainly was watching us as fodder for her books. But I didn't really pay enough attention when I was young.
Did you realize that as you were growing up, that you were appearing in literary works and being?
I knew that I was only maybe 12 or 13 when she published her first book, right? So I thought I got a kick out of the fact that, we were mentioned on the title page and that she was grabbing, something that I wrote when I was 5 years old, on a Valentine's Day card and using it to show how children process their emotions and things like that. But I didn't really connect it to anything other than like, oh, cool, I'm in a book.
These days, so many parents are kind of helicopter parents, how precious their children are. not that many kids have all that preciousness recorded in the public interest as a
Yeah.
example.
My mom was definitely not a helicopter parent. You know, she was gone so much that we really did have a lot of freedom and responsibility. But she was a great mom. And I think that she really did learn a lot from us how people's brains work, right? She was always studying people and seeing how they were processing things. And as, you know, I became a writer and a journalist myself, that became so interesting to me as well. And of course, studying people and studying other people's art and their works is how we become better ourselves.
Wow, that's wonderful that you're able to walk in her legacy. Have you read about things about yourself that she's included in her books that you felt taught you about yourself? Help you have some understanding of yourself? Or
Well, I don't know about that. She gave me a lot of feedback as I was honing my craft and learning my craft. She gave me a lot of feedback. She was very helpful to bounce essays. And, you know, I had a fairly popular blog for a while that I was writing back in the like 2010 to 2012 for a couple of years. And I would always send her my posts before I posted them, and she would give me critique. She was a really strong writer, but I think she was even stronger in her understanding of the English language. You know, she was a student of the English language. She was, you know, she was always the one to correct us on anything that we lie and lay, you know, or I and me and all the different mistakes that people make in the English language. She did not like that. So she was a great person to make sure that there were no mistakes in my essays. And she also gave me really good creative feedback.
sounds like a fantastic mentor for you when you write.
Oh, she was everything to me. You know, she was a mom, she was a mentor, she was a teacher, she was an example of a strong, independent woman. You know, she was, I think, one of the original superwomen of the 1970s. You know, she did it all. She raised 3 kids while simultaneously working full time at San Jose State and getting her Stanford PhD. You know, I look at her and I think, how did she keep it all together?
Wow, how did she? That's amazing.
I don't know. I think there were some places where she came very close to falling apart. And I think that's for a different podcast. But I think, you know, women of my generation, we sort of learned that we could do it all. And I think that's a fallacy. But again, that's a different subject. We can talk about that another time.
Did your mom grow up? Did she grow up in Germany or in the US?
She grew up in Germany and she immigrated at the age of 11. You know, she had a lot of trauma when she was young that she never processed, which I always thought was interesting that she went into the business of processing trauma and using creativity and writing to work through your past. But she never quite did it herself until she was 70 years old when she started writing a memoir about her German childhood. And unfortunately, she died before she could finish it. And that became my job. She handed that off to me, and her dying wish was that I finish her memoir, which I have done, and I'm waiting for it to be published. But I also, you know, the podcast that I have, Peggy, called The Man Who Calculated Death, that is an outgrowth of that promise that I made to my mother to really delve deeply into not only her past, but how it affected me, you know, generational guilt and handing down a legacy to the next generation, and how I really had to look some hard things in the face. My grandfather was a Nazi scientist who created the world's first cruise missile. He was in charge of the project to build it. And, you know, that was something that my mom didn't talk about very much. And so I really went deep into that. And I think the podcast and the book are really, I did it for her, you know, as much as I did it for myself. I wanted that to kind of honor her, the legacy that she gave to me, even as it is a very painful one.
So at the age of 11, I think we have some parallels. I'm working on a story. My mother at age 11 had a big trauma in her life as well. So
Yeah. I think we need to understand, you know, I think it's an important thing. and again, I'll reference the 3 essays that we're going to talk about, but like it's very important to understand how our histories, our ancestry, and that generational trauma and generational guilt that comes down to us, how that affects us and makes us who we are. And in understanding that, I think you can be healthier with really hard things. You know, if you keep it just bottled up and you don't look it in the face, I think it becomes problematic. There's a saying, I can't remember who it's by, but it's something about like trauma continues throughout the generations until someone is willing to face it. You know, it's something along those lines, and I find that very true.
I think generationally too, it's our parents' generations that only started to talk about the traumas. Before that, you know, people were trying to survive and enduring a lot of traumas, but it wasn't, you know, it wasn't things that maybe they were as comfortable talking about. And it was the 70s where the writers were starting to talk about how do we deal with these big things that people have gone through at this point.
Yeah, it really was the beginning of the self-help movement. You know, it was a very new thing. You did not talk about trauma in the 50s and 60s. You know, you drank your martini or took your Valium, or, you know, had all these different ways of medicating. Not that we don't medicate now, but, you know, I think then it was, you know, she rode that wave of people wanting to understand why they were the way they were and why they might have pain and how that's affected them. And it was huge for her. You know, she, like I said, she spoke all over the world about using, you know, she was a pioneer of split brain research. So that was her whole thing, is like using your left brain and your right brain together in order to release creativity, in order to release trauma, in order to process trauma and come to terms with it.
Wow, that's wonderful. It's kind of along the lines of what I'm trying to write about with my grandparents and my mother.
Well, you should look at her second book was called Pain and Possibility: Writing Your Way Through Personal Crisis. You know, it doesn't get more on the nose than that, right? And her first book was called Writing the Natural Way, which really was about the split brain research. But, you know, it's still applicable. I still get, every once in a while, I'll get an email from someone who says, I'm working with your mom's book, and it's just been life-changing. It's really cool.
Wow, that is on my reading list right now.
Oh,
now that you've told me about it.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's fantastic. So, and what an amazing mother you have. Now I'm understanding why, you know, that was probably an easy decision to do something in her honor, because she's had worldwide impact already. And with the Gabriele Rico Challenge, San Jose State, we're continuing that challenge by supporting not only the winners, but people who are applying to the contest. That's just really sparking a lot of writing, creative, writing, you know, about real life and all kinds. I feel very privileged to be on the desk of the nonfiction essays, to just see all these. There's a bunch of amazing stories that, you know, it's a lot of them that don't even make it into the magazine. But
it's incredible the quality that you guys send me every year. You know, you send me 3 essays, and then I have the terrible job of judging which one is the best. And it's always very difficult. It's always very difficult. And I send them to my sisters and my stepdad, and everybody gets a vote, and then I make the final decision. But it's, you know, we don't always come to a unanimous decision because they're all so good. And I've struggled in the past to pick a winner. So thank you for not sending me crap. They're all so high level.
You're welcome on behalf of the staff. But yeah, we're getting people from all over the world, and a lot of them are professors of creative writing, including this year's winner, and just, you know, really highly established writers who are sending us great stuff. And it's that I've just enjoyed reading all of them when they come in the fall too. There's kind of a whole range, you know. There's some that are like not that well written, but then there's a whole bunch that are, and just sort of sort through them. It's really, I'm loving it. So it's
the ones that make it to me are very, very high quality.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me, like, what was the process of actually starting this Rico challenge, and when did it start? I mean,
it started, so my mom died in 2013, and I believe we started it almost immediately. it really wasn't that difficult of a decision. It was just something that seemed right and seemed like it was very multifunctional. It used her career, it used the place that supported her career, San Jose State, and took her love for writing and passed that on. So it just made sense on so many levels. And the fact that we're 12 years in and we're still doing it, I think speaks to the success of it.
I think so. I think it's attracting people from around the world who are sending us some great stuff. And I'm having some battles on the desk of like fighting for things that people are like, so
Yeah.
thank you for doing that and sparking creativity.
You're welcome. Thank you.
It's people's lives and stories.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
It's incredible. I love reading through Read. You guys send it to me every year and I love reading through it because I'm just fascinated by all the different poetry and, fiction and nonfiction. And it's like having this beautiful magazine of everything I love right in, well, it's more than a magazine, an anthology or whatever you might call it, but it's right, I love it. They're all on my bookshelf.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. And with our new professor, Brooke McClurg, who's doing it, he's a nonfiction specialist. So he's starting to get some ambition with, growing our fame with the nonfiction aspect.
Fantastic.
A big thank you to your whole family for sponsoring this. Yeah, it's just a wonderful aspect of the magazine.
You're welcome.
So shall we look at first of the three contest winners that we have? 2023's Growing Up Godless by Robert Isaacs was about one who embraces his role as a professional singer in churches, though he is not a believer in God.
I loved this essay. This godless essay for me really resonated because I can identify with so much of what he's talking about this spirituality that is different from your typical worshiping in a church. And I just want to read what I wrote at the time. From the opening paragraph, a beautiful present tense moment of stepping into someone else's life. Growing Up Godless takes the reader on an adventure through religion, a realm nearly all of us have visited in some manner, but very few from Robert Isaacs' particular vantage point. As someone who has never been involved in organized religion myself, this is a seductive piece of writing, especially, for those of no faith. I loved getting to know parents and grandparents brought to life with fine strokes. And then this is a quote. Grandma Fan is the daughter of St. Louis real estate king, a staunch Christian scientist. She toodles around in the town's first car and is coddled by cooks and butlers and gardeners. But Fan is too fiercely independent to accept any ready-made identity, social, political, or spiritual. End quote. And while I found two viable endings in this essay, I can't quibble because as a whole, the story works so beautifully. Thank you, author, for reclaiming the word God for private use. And that's what I really felt was probably the most meaningful thing that I took away from this essay was that God can be used in a way that is not typically religious. He talks about so beautifully about how at the end he walks out of this church and he looks at the blue sky and he sees God in nature, right? So that really resonated with me. And I think that also the way that he presents his arguments is so non-threatening. So I think that people that are religious and aren't religious can hear the echoes of what he's trying to say without feeling taken aback. And I think when you're talking about something like religion, that is so easy to make enemies or offend somebody. And I feel like he just does it so beautifully that anyone can really not sympathize is not the word I'm looking for, but empathize with his message.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seemed I had not heard that topic before of someone being involved in a religious setting. And for him, he's a professional singer.
Yeah.
Yes,
And he
Cantor.
sung in like hundreds of church ceremonies, which you think would bind you more closely to the church, but it turned out to have an opposite effect with him. And he doesn't eschew religion and the church, well, maybe religion, but not the church. He sets the two apart, and he still feels very soothed by the church, but yet he realizes that God is not inside a church, and he makes the distinction. I love the way he makes the distinction between the church in lowercase and the church. There are big differences there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he feels something inside him that's resonating with the practices, the ceremonialness,
Yeah.
the sense of a spirituality, but not necessarily the particular beliefs of that
That's right.
group that
And
he's with.
And also, I think for the reader, you get a sense of what his background is. He fills you in beautifully and interestingly, which is why I picked that quote about Grandma Fan, because he lays out who his influences were growing up, which, surprise, were his parents and his grandparents. And they were from completely different sides. He had Jewish grandparents, and then he had Christian grandparents. I can't remember exactly what denomination, but he lets the reader in on what his influences were and how, as a young person, he kind of made his way into religion and then came to make his way back out.
Mm-hmm. He's accepting the parts of it that help him on his own terms.
Yeah.
And instead of being told you have to believe all these things, he's using what makes sense to him, using what gives him spiritual life.
And really making a distinction between religion and spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
It's different, and I think you can be spiritual without being religious, but I don't know if you can be religious without being spiritual. That's an interesting question.
Can be, yeah. Taking the form of it on without the inner life, the life of the spirit.
Yeah, I guess you can. And how sad is that?
Yeah, internal, external, and
Mhm.
right. Yeah. So there's just the imagery in his story that really grabbed me is the idea of this surplice. He even defines at the beginning, a surplice is a loose-fitting white ecclesiastical gown, wide sleeves, worn over a cassock. I'm like, why would I want to know that? But he starts with it saying, he throws it in the air and it just floats upon him. And it's such a spiritual metaphor that is part of what he did as a singer, is putting on this gown of whiteness that he feels clothed, robed in glorious white. And that sold me on the story.
I think that you're actually pointing out something that I felt when I first read this essay. The first line, I kind of had it the same as you, where I was like, why do I want to know this? This is like dry. I don't care. And then as soon as it got to that point where he paints the picture for us of it, flying up in the air and coming down over, I was like, oh, okay, now I want to know more. And then from then on, you are completely hooked. So I think it's an unconventional way of starting, but it's such a surprise and a delight to the reader when you get to the part where you're really feeling like you're seeing it and feeling it and understanding it, that you're like, okay, I'm in.
Yeah. And even in the middle of the paragraph, after the surplice falls upon you, you stretch your arms out through the sleeves. There's a moment when you're positioned just like Christ on the cross. No time to linger in the pose, though. Shimmy and shrug and shimmy to dislodge wrinkles. So it sounds like it's a real moment where when he's coming into his role as a singer, he needs to put it on. So he's like, and then he feels this moment of the religiousness of the Christian religion, Christ on the cross, and feeling that, and then trying to have it make sense for him as he goes through, and how it's enacted out in the behavior that he sees of the people, and some of the other choir boys, get trying to compete and poke each other.
Yeah. Well, it's a really transitory essay of somebody who starts as one thing and transitions into something else. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is him like looking for understanding as to why he made that sort of spiritual journey, right? That inward journey. And, we were talking about that earlier in terms of understanding who you are through understanding like what you were taught and what your influences were and how those things all came together to mold you into the person that you are. And I think this is a perfect example of that, and it's not in a bad way, like me, I was looking back into a Nazi past, into a history in World War II Germany with a grandfather who built weapons of war for the Luftwaffe. This is not that, but it's still, there's so many similarities there because I just think it's a human universal to, at some point, as you age, ask the question like, wait, where did I come from? Why are these things that are important to me? How did I get to be who I am politically, spiritually, emotionally, all those things? And I think that writing, really good writing, does like start somewhere and take us somewhere different.
Yeah. How does it change us and transform us? Fantastic for tying that together in a way that I hadn't realized with what you've been talking about already.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say about that one before we'll...
No, just that I loved it. I really appreciated it more because it was something that was so foreign to me. Like another thing about good writing is I think it brings us out of ourselves and our daily lives, right? I mean, if you write something about, Nazis and that's what I've been immersed in for 6 years. I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. I've been talking about that, but like this was so different from anything that I would ever write about or experience that it made me appreciate it even more.
Great choice. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the 2024 contest winner, Breaking Kayfabe by Amelia Skinner Saint.
Yep.
In this, the author relates the story of being a witness of a car accident and connecting it with other stories of witnessing fatal accidents, including a big-time pro wrestling performance that was broadcast on national television in which an accident occurred.
Yeah.
Would you like to read yours?
Captivating and descriptive, Breaking Kayfabe blends 3 storylines, as you just said, to create a portrait of the randomness of life and how one person's life-changing or life-ending moments are meaningless to the rest of us, who never realize we are, quote, in the middle of someone's emergency, end quote. The author invites readers behind the curtain of her inner life, the relationship with her daughter, beautifully hinted at, her own childhood trauma, and the bond with her mother, who has had her own psyche-scarring incidents. The use of pro wrestling to further illustrate that the line between life and death is a blink, a fraction of a second, half a heartbeat, drives home the author's point that every one of us deals with this terrifying reality on a daily basis. We just can't acknowledge it, or we might go nuts. Move along. Nothing to see here. But of course there is, and stories like this one help us see it. So those were my reactions. And I just think that like technically this essay was so beautiful because it's hard to weave 3 storylines together, especially ones as completely different as pro wrestling and motherhood and our histories and our pasts with her mother. But she takes them and she weaves them into this full story that really hits home about something that universally we all think about, right? I mean, it's like when my mom died, I wanted the whole world to stop. Like it was so life-changing and gut-wrenching for me that I would look out and I would be like, okay, can everyone just take a moment, please, to realize this? But that doesn't happen, right? I mean, everybody has their own little emergencies and the world just keeps turning and everybody moves on. And that's what she's talking about. And, it turns out that the accident that she is talking about, the first one that she and her daughter sees, which is this little girl getting hit as she leaves school with her grandmother, that is not even a big part of her life. It happened in a split second and then she saw it and she was there and then she moved on, but it was scarring to her. And anybody who's a human being can understand why that's scarring. And I think that was the moment that allowed her to look into like the broader themes of how these moments really shape and scar us, you know? The wrestling stuff for me is really just fun. Like I feel like she threw that in there because it was like, again, it's a place where I would never go. I just went to my first professional wrestling match down in Mexico. I went to see La Lucha Libre, which
Oh,
is
wow.
which is kayfabe. I don't know if it's kayfabe or kayfabe, but it's kayfabe at its highest level, right?
Wow.
Um, and I had never gone and seen that before, but after reading her essay, Amelia's essay, I was like, oh, wow, I want to know more about this.
It's a
So I just think
cool
that's
thing
super
to see
interesting and
this mock fighting, but just kind of real, but is it real? And yeah,
yeah.
how, yeah.
And then she, and then yes, in that case, it was real because the guy died. Um, I don't know if you have the last sort of line of her essay, but if my memory serves, it's like she takes us to that final moment
Yeah.
of this guy standing there and another guy falls out of the sky and hits the deck like dead. And he
Right.
realizes that that wasn't just part of the show, that this is
Yeah.
life. That was such a powerful ending, you know?
Yeah, right. It was and because it was being broadcast on national television, they say you just keep going. You can't, and the people in the audience thought it was just part of the performance. They didn't know he really did die. It was only
Well,
because
think
it
about that,
showed.
Peggy, how beautiful that is because it all segues back into these things that happen to us where the world just keeps going.
Mm,
It's all there. And that is, you just pointed out exactly what I think her point is that the show must go on. And the show does go on, even as we wish that it wouldn't sometimes.
yeah. And the macabre thing is the whole performance is meant to be very violent and having people die. Sometimes they would die and then the next episode they were back to life again. And so it's playing with people's sense of trauma as entertainment, and
Yeah.
like, this is all make believe. And so I'm still like, I don't quite get the purpose of that other than maybe people feel like there's so much trauma in real life that they want to come and see it and know that it's not real. I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe, I don't know, you should probably go see something because I don't know that I would do it again, but it was really interesting to me to see how much of a choreographed, it's a dance. I mean,
Mm.
it's a type of dance, to me, it was at least that they do. It's very highly choreographed.
Yeah.
And of course, they do make it look like they are getting actually hurt and broken, and then they just jump up and walk off.
Mm.
No
Yeah.
problem.
Hopefully, occasionally they have real injuries, but and
Yes.
the very last line in the thing. So when people were like you said, the performers didn't realize he really was dying. They're like, why did that just happen? And it wasn't. But the very last line is they said that. So this man who was supposed to be come down, like lowered down by a rope, somehow it didn't work right, and he just fell, and that's when he ever. But they said that as he fell, they could hear him yelling, "Look out, get out of the way." And that's the end. So,
Yep. Yeah.
yeah, there's people seeing him from up above on the catwalk, and they said it looked like he was just straightening his cape, and then he was gone, and then he fell, and then the rest of the audience thought, "Oh, I guess that must be a, fake performance," which is the word kayfabe is based on fake, I guess, Pig Latin.
She said that it was like a Pig Latin version of fake, you know, a
Fake fake, kayfabe.
like that. But really, let's give credit where credit's due for Amelia Skinner Saint because I don't think many people would ever like bring in that element to make a point. That was I think that's what put her over the top with me because again, there were three really great essays to choose from that year, as there always are. But that's what put it over the top for me is that she used this really creative device to um, entertain. I will use that word, entertain, in an essay that's really about hard stuff. It's about very, very difficult subject matter. A little girl getting hit by a car, her mother witnessing two motorcyclists being killed by getting hit by a car.
Mhm.
We delve, as I said in my comments, we delve into her relationship with her mother, and she gives us some really tantalizing bits about that. But she's struggling with a lot in this essay. And the kayfabe thing, I think, gives us a little bit of relief from that, because it is entertainment and it's entertaining to learn about it.
It's kind of a form of therapy to have entertainment that has this violence and to deal with it in a sort of a comic or way, because people's lives are full of violence. There's all kinds of traumas that do happen,
Yeah, setting that out really, really worked well.
There is the interview of her that I did on our In the Reads podcast. So audience, check it out when you get a chance. But it was really wonderful. And I was very pleased to be able to meet both Amelia Skinner Saint and Robert Isaacs at our Read Gala and talk to them about their stories. Wonderful people. And as you're saying, tying together the mother, the generational relationships too of this. There's a lot in here. This year's winner, the 2025 contest winner, Blank Spaces, Black Frames by Katrin Trueblood, telling the story of the author's mother choosing to end her life by voluntary stopping of eating and drinking, known as VSED. So, Suzanne, would you like to read your judges' comments on Blank Spaces, Black Frames?
This is the one that's most fresh in my head. Blank Spaces, Black Frames is a sharp, insightful look into the life of a mother struggling to embrace her own dying and the daughter who observes it. Even when her mind began to fail, this mother kept some control by writing in her calendar and on Post-it notes, quote, "The record of a woman reminding herself she is loved," end quote. And then came the startling ending. The essay just stopped. At first, I couldn't believe it, but then I realized that the story went blank, and there was such quiet power in that choice. So as I'm remembering it, I felt like I wanted more of this essay. This essay obviously resonated with me very strongly because of my mother's really slow, kind of sad ending. And one that we didn't plan for the way this woman did. And I was quite jealous that she was able to do this. But when it ended, I was like, no, you can't just end it like that. But then I realized that that's part of it, right? It's like we plan and we plan and we plan, or we don't, or whatever. And then all of a sudden somebody's just done. They're just gone. And you can't go back and do it again. You can't ever get it back and have a do-over. And so that really just was like, just hit me really hard. And this essay, I think, was just over 700 words. Right. It's short. It's short.
Like, what?
Yeah. In fact, I did, I think, make a note on this because there was a part of this that I just want to read. And it ends with that quote that I used, that it is the record of a woman reminding herself she is loved. Because, I mean, how powerful is that as we lose our minds, which is a very different way than my mom went. My mom died of cancer, but this woman's, basically has Alzheimer's, or she's got dementia. How sad to forget that you are so loved, And so she would write these things down. So she said, she has used so much whiteout that her calendar has texture, which is fitting for someone who studied painting. Items are circled, lines drawn between them. Notes about who will walk the dog, get the hearing aids fixed, and take her to the neurologist. And there are notes about what happened, who came to visit, and who called. And then these are in italics. Kate did shopping for me, exclamation point. Eva here with ice cream, exclamation point. Frank phoned, long visit, right foot numb, vertigo. Andrew has my car, headache, left side. Connor to check on me, exclamation point. It is the record of a woman reminding herself she is loved. And I don't know, that's just it's so sad to me that that's really what happens when somebody that you love has dementia. They just sort of forget everything. And at the end, they don't even really remember who you are.
Yeah. And without who they are and why am I here? And their sense of self is
a difficult road to walk. You lose somebody, Peggy, in such a completely different way, right? Than cancer. Like my mom was sentient really up until maybe the last 10 days, which is a long time. But, we could still talk with her and laugh with her. And she was still completely there with us. And this is a different way of losing someone. And I might make the argument that it's more difficult.
they're all rough, no matter what way it goes. And so in my interview with Catherine Trueblood, it was really interesting to hear, what the process was like. And they said, and about her mother, and she was honoring her mother. It was her mom who chose to end her life in that way, because she wanted to control how the ending would go. And she did not want to be locked up in a memory ward. Yeah, have to listen to the interview to find all the details. But her mom was a pioneer as well, and a very strong person. And the daughter, the author, was supporting the mom's decision, and yet they had to have the process where the mom is forgetting. And so they said, you don't want to stop, you don't want to interrupt it once you've started it. So to have to remember that she's going through this process, and the doctor support.
So many hard things to grapple with in this essay. And, I mean, especially I think at our age where, most of my friends are losing their parents right now. And, it's a personal choice for everybody. But after what I went through with my mom, I guarantee you this is the kind of thing that I would want to do. That's the choice I would make. And so reading about somebody who actually was making it, I appreciated that so much, even as it was very difficult. My aunt actually went through a similar thing. She didn't have dementia, but she had cancer. And so she chose the Death with Dignity Act here in California. And I respect her so much for that. Making her choices and staying in control,
Mm-hmm. And people around the world throughout the centuries, people die. And how do you make the death a way that honors their life? And, what's the most caring way to let people die? And it's not always the way we treat people in our American healthcare system. My aunt had said at one point with my own mother, is this giving her more living or more dying? And, to make know that there's time where it's going to be inevitable. What's the best way to handle it? So
I found with my mom's death, which really resonated with me the whole time that I was reading this article. I found that there was a pivot point where I went from hoping that she would live to hoping that she would die. So and I remember it very specifically, where I realized that hoping for her to stay alive longer was really just prolonging this act of dying that she was doing. And so then I switched everything that I was hoping for and sending my energy for to just saying, Mom, it's okay. You can go, you can go, you can go. And that's really what she needed. She needed us to let go of her, right? We hold on to the people that we love so strongly. She waited for all of us to be out of the room before she went. I was determined to be there. I didn't leave her side for like 3 days. And then, we all ran out because our kids got there after a week of not seeing our kids, and we all ran downstairs, and that's when she went. So
her own terms. Yeah.
Can't plan for everything, but she did it on her own terms. That's right.
And I think with this story and your story and mine as well, what's the best way we can honor our parents and their lives, and in the process of the end stage of dying, but also how we write about them and how we're exploring their lives and what they've passed on to us. And so I think it's such a important part of who we are. I think as Americans, we have a tendency to have less of that. We feel like whatever I accomplish myself individually, it's the American way. I'm a self-made person and see how great I am. But I think we're oftentimes less realizing, and we need to realize more, how such an important part of who we are is what my parents, my mother, father have given me, and their grandparents have given them.
Yeah. I speak to young people sometimes at colleges or in groups, and I always try to make the point that you're going to care someday. So make sure you ask those questions now. Like, think about questions that you want to know, because at some point you're going to want to know, you're going to be interested on where you came from and what your history is. And at some point, those opportunities will be gone for you. So I always try to urge younger people, because I get it. Like, we're busy, we're creating our lives, and we're going to school, and we're getting married, and we're having children, and we're doing all these things. And it's just like so present that we don't realize. I think Kierkegaard said, the past can only be understood backwards, but life must be lived forward. And I love that. And I use it because at some point we want to understand, and we have to look back. And if you can't get the answers anymore and they're gone, that's really, I think, really frustrating. And I've heard from a lot of people, as people listen to my podcast, The Man Who Calculated Death, and I do more podcasts and talk about it. People want to know, like, oh, how do I capture the stories? And I say, just roll your iPhone, roll the voice memos, get the stories, before they're lost.
Yeah, let them start talking. Yeah. So can you just say a little more of how did your mother's choice of how to finish her life? How do you feel like that reflected her view of life, her values in life?
Meaning, like, how she chose to end her life?
What choices she had at the end of her life and how she handled that?
Well, God, that's a long answer, Peggy. You know, my mom accepted her ending better than anybody else. My mom called her cancer that she knew she wasn't going to beat, she called it the adventure of dying. And she really wanted to explore it. Out of all the trauma that she had in her life, of all the things she was afraid of looking at, she was sexually assaulted when she was 7 years old. Her city burned down around her as she was cowering in an air raid shelter. Her mother was killed uh, in a mysterious, violent way when she was 7 years old. There were so many things, but her own dying didn't scare her at all. And
Wow.
she talked about it. In fact, I have in the podcast, in the first episode of the podcast, I have my mother on tape asking us to finish her memoir, as her dying wish was that my sisters and I would finish this book for her, this journey into the past. And the only reason I got it is because when she got sick, as a journalist, I was just determined to document everything about her, to get as much as I could, to capture it as much as I could. And I didn't even know I had all of these things until years later, when I went back and started listening to these voice memos. And I was like, oh my goodness, I have so much.
Wow.
Um, and she talked a lot to me about the continuum between life and death, and the analogy of the seasons, where we go through the different seasons, and then spring comes around again, and so I think that she used every bit of her creativity and her love for expression and the split brain research and all the stuff that she had learned over the years. She applied that to this experience that she wanted to grasp and hold and understand as much as she could. And there's one little anecdote that I'll tell you that made me realize, I think, that people who are dying really do experience something very, very special. And there is something there, because she was unconscious for several days. But at the very end of her life, we were taking shifts, and we were all lying she was in a hospital bed at that point. We were all lying next to her bed, so that if she needed anything or stirred, we would be awakened. And I tied a string, a little ribbon from my wrist to her wrist. And so I was lying there at the end, maybe it was 3 days before she died, and she hadn't said anything in days. And I felt a yank on my wrist, and I jumped up, and I was like, Mom, Mom. And she was completely, oh, I'll get teared up when I say this, but she was completely there. I could see it. And she opened her eyes, and she looked at me, and she looked all around me, and she said, God, I love all the colors you're wearing. And I was wearing like a dirty t-shirt, and a gray and she was seeing everything that was sparking around me, whatever that aura was that I was throwing off is what she could see. And she those were the last words that I heard her say. So I really feel like until the very end, my mom was documenting in her head what was happening. She was a writer till the very end and a creative till the very end. And I'm so proud of that example that she set for me and for my children about being fearless in the face of something that so many people are afraid of. We're all so afraid of death, and she just really embraced it. And you'll hear her in the podcast. You'll hear her embrace it. You hear it in her own words.
It's amazing. And it really sounds to me like she lived a whole life, an integrated life that was meaningful for her and filled with love as a family.
Yeah, she was awesome. I miss her every day. And the Rico challenge is one way that we keep her in the world. And we honor her memory and her great contribution to the creative process.
Thank you for sharing so much of that with me. And I feel a great honor to be walking in that legacy too, as part of it.
San Jose State's a very, very important place in our family. And I appreciate all of what the university gave to her and what she gave to the university. She was president's scholar and she was chair of the English department. And, she just loved it. She loved it there.
We're just so privileged to be able to be San Jose State, all that San Jose State's giving us because of the people who created it. And your mother's just a huge part of the history of San Jose State.
Yeah.
Giving to many people, empowering their voices, empowering all of our voices to be able to write.
Right on.
To wrap up with Katrin Truebloods, she is writing a story. There is more to the story. I too felt that this story was so short. It's only 724 words, I believe. And as you said, that the shortness of it, that's part of the meaning of the story. But she is writing a whole book on that. So that's going to be out.
Awesome.
There's more to read. And you've been doing a podcast, and it sounds like you're writing a book as well. Can you tell me more about that?
So the podcast is out now. We're actually just starting every Tuesday. We're dropping an episode. So the 9 episodes will be out in full, like sometime in mid-May. There's 2 episodes out right now. It's called The Man Who Calculated Death, and it is that deep dive into my own family history in Nazi Germany and a lot of deep, dark secrets that I unearth, things that my mom hadn't even told me. And I think that in some cases, my mom didn't even know. I solve a 80-year-old family mystery at the end of it that nobody has ever been able to find the truth of. And that's how and why my grandmother died. So there's a lot of, I would say it's like a mix between documentary, history, and a little bit of true crime thrown in there for fun. It's always fun to like start following a thread and pulling at it and finally getting to the answer. I feel so grateful that I was able to find the answer. So yeah, The Man Who Calculated Death. I worked on it for 6 years. The companion book is finished and about to go out to publishers. And that is my mom's memoir. So I finally finished it with the help of my sisters. And it is basically a 2-narrative book. So we bounce between her narrative as the memoir and then my processing of what I'm learning from what she's written. So it's really her narrative balanced against my narrative every other chapter.
Sounds like a mother-daughter legacy.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like it truly is. It's we both wrote this book, and I'm very, very proud of it. I think I've been able to keep her voice and her story and what she wanted to tell while also giving readers some really good context, right? I think what was missing in her memoir was the context of what was happening in World War II. And I think the story that she tells becomes even more powerful when you understand what was happening in Germany at that time. right? And so I think that those two storylines together give you the whole picture, which is really a microcosm of what Nazi Germany was like at that time.
Mhm.
You know, we're never going to experience that. In fact, the last survivors are dying out. So if you really want to know what it was like for a family of 7, they had 5 kids in Nazi Germany, starting in 1937, which is when my mom was born. I think it's a really great read.
Fantastic. So
Yeah.
look for that as soon as it comes out. And
Yeah, you'll know. I'll be blasting it all over my social media, which is at Suzanne Rico at all my social media. You'll see it there for sure.
yeah, that is wonderful. And that's a great honor. You're honoring the legacy of your mother and her parents by telling the truth of what happened and in telling it in a way that with understanding of the context of the time.
I try to look at it from a very, very journalistic point of view, in that I don't go into it trying to redeem my grandfather. I don't go into it trying to condemn my grandfather. I go into it looking for the truth and trying to put all the puzzle pieces together into a meaningful narrative.
That sounds great. I've heard some of the podcast about your podcast, and they said your podcast is fantastic compared to other ones that are true crime, that yours really delivers is what
I'm very proud of it. I don't usually pat myself on the back for my own projects, but I think this is actually pretty good.
Excellent. Can't wait to dig into it. Closing out comments of your work as a journalist. Go Gators, San Francisco State University. You had your master's.
Yep.
ECA there. Was my undergrad alma mater.
Loved it.
Yeah.
Learned a lot there. They got me my first television job. I was very happy because I was able to jump from San Francisco State to my first reporting job in Sacramento, California. So that was great. Yeah, they really prepared me to be successful in the broadcast industry.
Yay. Yeah, I was a creative writing and long and winding journey with that. I have a question for you. Which television network was your preferred one? ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, or TBBN? Which one is your favorite?
Well, I would say that my favorite job was working for NBC in San Diego. That was my favorite job. I worked there only for 2 years, but it was a great job and I got to do some of the best reporting of my life. So that was my favorite. But those other 2 are fictional.
Oh, yes, I know.
The TBBN one, I think, was True Blood, which I reported on the True Blood. I had a little recurring part on True Blood as a reporter, right? Shocking.
You did a very nice job.
Yeah,
getting those vampires out there.
Thank you. Yeah, I always told them I want you to bring me back and kill me off somehow. You know, somehow kill me off and put gruesome makeup on me, but they never did. They never killed me.
Thank you so much, Suzanne, for spending your time with us to learn more about the fantastic Gabriele Rico Challenge for Nonfiction. I hope we're doing your mother honor.
For sure. It was great. Best of luck with Reed. You guys are doing a great job.
You can find out more about Suzanne Rico at www.suzannerico.com. That's SUZANNERICO.com. Thanks to our guest, Suzanne Rico. This has been In the Reads, the podcast of San Jose State University's Read Magazine, California's oldest literary journal. Thanks for listening.